Welcome, wanderer, to Whispers of History, your quiet place on the internet where history hums instead of shouts. Tonight's tale is soft, strange, and just absurd enough to lull you into sleep's waiting arms. It's about pineapples. Yes, those tropical thrones of thorny fruit, and why the powdered wigs of Georgian England seemed to quake in their presence. You're about to drift through powdered parlors, scandalous dinner parties, and quiet garden paths lined with secrets. Not all of them floral. Before we begin, take a breath, maybe two. Now gently tap like and subscribe if you'd like more sleepy strolls through curious chapters of the past. And if you can still keep your eyes open, comment below with where you're listening from and what time it is. We love knowing where our whispers reach. Tonight's story is long, winding, and not in a rush, just like the best kind of dreams. Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You're walking through a garden that costs more to maintain than the salary of 10 village teachers. The gravel path beneath your feet crunches politely, the sort of sound that whispers don't step out of line. On either side, topiary hedges stand clipped within an inch of their dignity, some shaped like chess pieces, others like birds too elegant to exist in real life. It's early evening in 1764 and you are not the gardener. You're a guest of the Viscount of, which is only slightly more impressive than it sounds. The sun is yawning behind the greenhouse, golden light spilling like honey over the glass panes. You pause in front of the structure, not because of the architecture, but because inside there it is. A single pineapple. Its skin is spiked like a mace, its crown absurdly regal, and its color, somewhere between gold and defiance, makes it impossible to look away. And yes, it's under glass as if it might otherwise escape. The pineapples in Georgian England are not just fruit. They are symbols of impossible wealth, of colonies and corsairs, of botany and boldness. Some families rent pineapples by the hour to impress guests. Others never taste them at all, only parade them across dinner tables like a holy relic with vitamin C. You are told by the Viscount himself that the pineapple must never be touched. He's only half joking. There's a look in his eyes that says he's buried people for less. One historical fact floats into your sleepy mind. In the 1700s, it could cost the equivalent of $8,000 to grow a single pineapple in England. Most of that went into heating the pineries' greenhouses kept so artificially warm they sometimes killed the staff. The air smells like damp stone and something citrusy trying to assert itself through the cold. As you lean closer to the glass, the butler coughs behind you. Not loudly, just meaningfully. And here's something obscure. Some Georgian hostesses would keep a pineapple diary detailing every guest who had seen their fruit. Pineapple envy was real, and oh, it burned. Historians still debate whether the first pineapple grown in England was actually edible, or just a triumphant botanical middle finger to France. The gravel shifts under your feet as you step away, still watched by the butler. You wonder not for the first time why you came, but it's too late now. The dinner bell has rung. The dining room smells like polished oak, aged brandy. and something charred just enough to imply it was cooked by candlelight, not skill. You take your seat third from the hostess, which means you're either moderately important or someone else cancelled. The woman beside you is wearing 3 brooches, 2 more than socially appropriate. She leans toward you like a door swinging off one hinge. "I heard," she says, voice like damp lace, "that Lord tried to steal the Viscount's pineapple." You nod because this seems entirely plausible. It's true that theft wasn't always about jewels or money. Sometimes in these powdered circles, reputation was the currency, and fruit the gold standard. In fact, one dinner party in 1772 ended with a duel over who had the riper pineapple. The fruit in question was later carved into a decorative hat. Your soup arrives and it's orange, not carrot, not pumpkin. Orange, you sip it cautiously. The taste is somewhere between burnt sugar and vengeance. As across the table, a man is loudly explaining how his pineapple plant has refused to bloom for 3 years, and he's certain it's due to bad moral energy. No one disagrees. They simply nod as if moral energy is a perfectly acceptable agricultural variable. The hostess rings a small silver bell. 2 footmen appear wheeling in a cart. Under a velvet dome, they reveal the pineapple. Yes, the same one. It's been moved, or there are 2. The idea that this household might have more than one makes you feel faint. Though the guests applaud, you wonder briefly if this is what it's like to attend the opera in reverse. Here's something curious. At the height of pineapple fever, some upper-class families commissioned pineapple-themed wallpaper, pine-scented perfumes, even pineapple-shaped coffins. The symbolism was commitment. As the pineapple is paraded around the room, no one eats it. Of course not. That would be like carving up the queen for a pie. Instead, it is admired, sniffed briefly, and returned to its glass case like a relic on loan from the gods. You catch the butler's eye again. He does not blink. He may be guarding the pineapple with his life. Historians still debate whether the pineapple truly symbolized hospitality, or whether it was simply a status flex so elaborate it confused later generations. The fire crackles in the hearth and a dessert is served. A confection shaped like a pineapple, made of sugar, marzipan, and crushed regrets. You eat quietly, thinking maybe you should take up gardening or piracy. As outside, the wind begins to hum through the hedges, and somewhere far beyond the greenhouse, another pineapple waits its turn in the spotlight. You wake the next morning in a room lined with velvet drapes and tapestries so old they seem to sigh when the wind shifts. Somewhere in the house, a maid is dragging something heavy across the floor, and it echoes like thunder wrapped in wallpaper. The mattress beneath you is overstuffed and slightly uneven, like it holds secrets from 3 centuries ago. You stare at the ceiling, which features a painted cherub that seems frankly disappointed in you. As outside, the garden stirs. Birds chirp with all the urgency of beings who don't know breakfast can be brought to bed. You rise slowly, your clothes folded neatly by the fireplace, and make your way to the hall. The pineapple is gone. You're not panicking, not exactly. But the glass dome is empty and the butler is standing beside it like a ghost who's just learned he was murdered. He doesn't speak, but you catch the tightness in his jaw. The household is unsettled. In Georgian society, the sudden disappearance of a pineapple was cause for social panic, second only to being served cold pheasant. Downstairs, the Viscount is holding court in his breakfast salon, packing in front of a fireplace too large for its purpose. He's reading a letter, clutching it. You catch the word Brussels and sabotage before he notices you. "Ah, you," he says, as if remembering your existence mid-despair. "Did you happen to notice anything unusual about the fruit last night?" You blink, it looked particularly. He does not laugh. Here's your historical anchor. In the 18th century, a stolen pineapple wasn't always about hunger, it was about humiliation. To lose a pineapple was to be mocked in every salon, pamphlet, and whispering gallery in town. The Viscount gestures to the table where breakfast is laid out. Toast, jam, pickled eel, and a boiled egg balanced like a challenge. "A lord was here last night," he mutters. "He wore gloves at dinner. No one wears gloves at dinner." You nod solemnly. It does seem damning. Here's a curious cultural tidbit. Some hosts used fake pineapples made of wax or porcelain to fool their rivals into thinking they'd grown another one. It worked surprisingly often, until one incident where a guest bit into it to test the ripeness. He was never invited again. Historians still debate whether this was the origin of England's deep distrust of fake fruit. As you butter your toast, the household prepares to mobilize. There will be inquiries. There will be reputational bloodshed. Possibly there will be a duel. And you, a humble guest, are now technically a witness in the case of the disappearing fruit. The cherub on the ceiling is definitely judging you now. Later that day, you find yourself being escorted, somewhat gently, by the Viscount's eldest daughter, Lady, through the estate's west corridor. "Don't mind Papa," she says, her voice soaked in a kind of performative calm. "He once lost a silk cravat and blamed the cook for a fortnight." The lady is wearing a gown that rustles like a conspiracy, and she smells faintly of ink and expensive worry. She waves a fan as if it's a weapon. You pass portraits of grim-faced ancestors, many of them holding pineapples, oddly enough. One even has a pineapple perched on a pedestal beside his war medals. Grandfather George believed pineapples cured melancholy, offers. He insisted on sitting beside one for exactly 17 minutes each day. You stifle a smile. Did it work? She shrugs. He also believed in leeches and spontaneous combustion, so the data's mixed. You arrive at the library. It's the kind of room where secrets gather in the bindings. Dust motes float like confetti for forgotten ideas. On one table lies an open ledger written in looping script, ink still fresh. The lady taps the page. Every pineapple purchase, gift, and suspected theft, it's a family tradition. As indeed, the page lists an 1823 incident titled The Great Pineapple Swap, resulted in tears and marriage. You make a mental note to revisit that one. One fact, Georgian households sometimes recorded fruit-related events with the same solemnity reserved for engagements and deaths. There are known estate records noting the arrival of the pineapple in golden ink. Suddenly lowers her voice. Papa thinks did it, but I suspect Aunt Judith. You blink, Aunt Judith. She's always disliked the idea of food being unshared. You should seen what she did to the ornamental goose. You decide not to ask. Here's something odd. In some circles, pineapples were seen as dangerously foreign. Their strange shape, exotic origin, and sweet intensity made them the focus of suspicion, even fear. At least one satirical play claimed pineapples caused hot thoughts in otherwise decent people. Historians still debate whether that was satire or just early dietary paranoia. As you leave the library, the butler appears once more, this time with a silver tray bearing a folded note. It reads, "The fruit you seek is not lost merely. Misunderstood, midnight conservatory." The lady lifts an eyebrow. "Well," she says, "that's either an invitation or a trap." And you, already neck-deep in fruity mystery, realize this may become the strangest weekend of your life. The conservatory at midnight is exactly as dramatic as you hoped. The moonlight slices through the tall arched windows in elegant shards, casting silver on the tiled floor and illuminating the plants in a ghostly glow. Somewhere a harp plays, though there is no harpist. Probably just the wind pretending to be talented. You arrive a few cautious minutes before the hour, footsteps muffled by old stone and older silence. The air smells like damp earth, wax-polished leaves, and something faintly tropical like pineapple breath. In the far corner, obscured by a large potted palm, stands a figure. Aunt Judith, dressed in shadow-gray lace and a look of casual rebellion. She is holding a candle and a trowel, which is never a comforting combination. You came," she says, with the tone of someone who doesn't care but very much cares. "I did. You keep your voice neutral, like a diplomat walking into a bakery wars." She gestures you closer. Beneath the palm, beneath the loose soil, beneath a very startled-looking beetle sits the pineapple. A hole untouched, slightly muddier than before but gloriously smug. "I took it," Aunt Judith says, "because no one else would." You blink, would what? I did. She straightens, placing the trowel on the ground with unnecessary theatrical flair. "We've had that blasted fruit for 6 weeks. It's passed from dinner to dinner like some sacred idol. Nobody ever eats it. We re-wax it, refrigerate it, bow to it. It's a fruit, not a deity." Pause. You buried it." She nods to prove a point. In Georgian England, food-based rebellion wasn't exactly common, but neither was it unheard of. One recorded event from 1778 features a noblewoman flinging a roast pheasant from a window after it was served for the third time that week. The pheasant survived. Dignity did not. Let me guess, you say. Historians still debate whether the pineapple deserved it. Judith snorts. Historians don't debate anything interesting. That's why I take matters into my own hands. You lean over the pineapple. Its skin gleams dully in the moonlight, a little less royal now, a little more tired. Here's something obscure. A few radical botanists of the time believed pineapples emitted distracting vapors that could inspire irrational behavior in enclosed rooms. This theory, of course, was mostly tested in ballrooms and failed marriages. Judith places a hand on your shoulder. Let them panic for one more day. Let them look beneath their titles and gossip. Maybe then they'll realize fruit isn't powers. You nod, pretending to understand. Midnight conspiracies are not usually fruit-based, but you're flexible. The pineapple rests between you like a sleeping beast. And behind the glass walls of the conservatory, dawn begins to whisper. By morning, the house is practically vibrating. Servants scurry with faces locked in panic neutral, and guests have begun speculating, loudly, about a fruit theft ring operating within the aristocracy. One elderly gentleman is certain this is the French, obviously. You eat breakfast quietly while outside the window. A gardener in breeches that have seen better centuries argues with a goose. The goose is winning. The lady appears beside you holding a small plate of toast and scandal. It's chaos, is denying everything. Father is composing a letter to the Gentleman's Gazette, and cousins fainted 3 times, though we suspect she just enjoys the lying down. You sip your tea, now comfortably resigned to your role as passive accomplice in pineapple purgatory. Judith has it, you say, she buried it. Pauses mid-bite. That makes an uncomfortable amount of sense. She sits down, smoothing her gown like a practiced diplomat. Papa must never know. If he finds out, he'll write another poem. And the last one compared the pineapple to Helen of Troy. Here's your historical footnote. It wasn't uncommon for nobles to compose elaborate poetry to inanimate objects. A baronet once wrote 42 stanzas to his favorite pair of velvet slippers. They were apparently draped in loyalty. You glance out the window. A footman is interviewing a sheep. The investigation is clearly expanding. And now, the obscure tidbit. The pineapple was once considered so sacred in some Georgian homes that guests were asked to bow before it. One visitor refused and was reportedly not invited back until the following century. You and spend the next hour devising a plan. It involves a fake confession from a fictional stable boy named, a forged pineapple receipt, and a strategically placed wheelbarrow. It is, by all accounts, brilliant. Historians still debate whether the great fruit scandal of 1764 actually occurred, or whether it was an elaborate satire published by a bored diarist with too much ink and too few suitors. The butler enters the room with the expression of a man who has just seen the abyss, and it asked him for a receipt. He bows. The Viscount requests your presence. Immediately. You rise thinking of pineapples, poetry, and how the world has changed not at all since people decided that some things were too precious to eat. The pineapple waits, so does the truth and possibly another poem. You follow the butler down a corridor that smells faintly of lemon oil and old ambitions. Portraits line the walls, stern ancestors in powdered wigs, all looking slightly judgmental, as if they never got involved in fruit-related deception. The drawing room is grand, but today it's been converted into something between a courtroom and a melodrama. The Viscount stands by the hearth like a man awaiting trial or planning one. Beside him, a small audience of aristocrats murmur into handkerchiefs and teacups. He turns as you enter, eyes narrowed. We have reason to believe the pineapple has been relocated. He says relocated the way one might say kidnapped. You glance around the room. Lady gives you a subtle nod, just enough to confirm your co-conspirator status. You are no longer simply a guest. You are part of the plan. The Viscount paces. This household has prided itself on its fruit stewardship for 3 generations. That pineapple was not merely tropical produce, it was our legacy. You clear your throat and deliver the first piece of your fiction. I heard, you begin carefully, that the stable boy was seen carrying a suspicious crate toward the conservatory. A collective gasp. Someone spills their tea. The Viscount whispers, but he was so symmetrical. Now the cover-up begins. A wheelbarrow is wheeled in containing not the pineapple but a similar fruit. A carved turnip dressed in pineapple skin with a small embroidered ribbon reading in loving tribute. The steps forward, we believe panicked. He feared the pineapple would be blamed for the recent decline in Aunt Judith's marmalade. There's a pause so silent you can hear the crackle of the fire questioning its own purpose. One real historical fact here. The Georgian elite were obsessed with elaborate hoaxes and jests. Some households had entire weekends devoted to fake scandals, lost pets, stolen wigs, or a goose painted gold. This pineapple conspiracy would not be entirely out of place. Though the Viscount eyes the fake fruit, it seems smaller. It shrank, you offer quickly, grief. He sighs, we'll bury it in the family orchard, quietly with music. As outside, the rain begins, soft and unbothered. Somewhere in the garden, the real pineapple rests beneath its palm, unaware that it has just been honored with an impromptu funeral and an undeserved reputation for sedition. And here's a strange tidbit. Some Georgians believed pineapples absorbed human energy, particularly arrogance. A few even insisted their pineapples went sour with scandal. Historians still debate whether this was early psychology or just dietary superstition. You bow slightly, take a biscuit from a silver tray, and exit the room with the careful dignity of someone who just lied to a viscount about a root vegetable. You don't feel guilty, not really. The pineapple lives, the scandal dies, and Aunt Judith is probably writing a manifesto. As evening falls with a thick velvet hush, candles flicker along the hallway like uncertain thoughts. You're back in the conservatory, alone again, well, almost. The real pineapple has been restored to its rightful pedestal, cleaned and polished and slightly damp from its recent burial. A small card now sits in front of it, in silent service to truth. As Aunt Judith appears beside you like mist. You did well, she says, offering you a piece of candied ginger from a tin shaped like a badger. Not everyone understands symbolic fruit warfare. You nod politely, chewing on sugar and secrecy. Joins you, dressed in her less formal evening gown. A navy blue thing with sleeves that look like they were designed by someone who disliked elbows. I hear has been promoted, she says with a wink. Official pineapple liaison. You all laugh quietly, of course. The pineapple is resting. In truth, there was once an actual job in certain grand households called the fruit steward. Their sole duty, ensuring fruit was displayed correctly, admired sufficiently, and never allowed to rot in public view. The Viscount enters then, looking older but somehow relieved. I've written a poem, he announces. Would you like to hear it? Your smile is that of a hostage, very much. He begins. Oh, golden fruit from distant shore, whose crown we dare not ask for more. Though soil may take thy flesh to keep, though thy legacy shall never sleep. A beat silence. Aunt Judith claps once dryly, whispers there's a second verse. You make a sound that might be admiration or suppressed despair. Historians still debate whether Georgian pineapple poetry was ever sincere, or simply another form of performative status, the fruit equivalent of today's limited edition sneaker drops. It's another obscure fact. Some aristocrats had pineapple-themed dinnerware sets that were never used. One particularly dedicated collector had pineapple forks, pineapple wine glasses, and pineapple-shaped salt shakers, all in solid silver, and all locked in a cabinet labeled "Not for Company." The Viscount sighs contentedly. Perhaps next year, he says, we'll try mangoes. Judith blinks, God help us. You excuse yourself and walk back through the conservatory, past the tired ferns and the solemn orchids, past the sleeping fruit and the dreaming stars beyond the glass. Your weekend has involved a fake theft, a vegetable impersonation, and a poetic eulogy to a tropical plant. And somehow you've never felt more relaxed. The next morning arrives on a breeze that smells like wet moss and apology. You're awake earlier than usual, not because you want to be, but because a squirrel has found its way into the upstairs corridor and is currently being debated by 3 footmen and a decorative sword. You stay out of it. You've had your fill of household drama for now. Downstairs, the breakfast table is laid with more intention than usual. The silver gleams like a smug secret, and there's a new centerpiece. A pineapple, not the real one, but a lifelike wax replica dressed up in tiny velvet ribbons. A gentle nod, perhaps, to the week's events, or a warning that fruit is always watching. The lady pours you tea with a grace that implies either aristocratic breeding or excellent wrist strength. So, she says, Papa decided to host a reconciliation ball. Over a pineapple, you ask, sipping carefully. No, she says, smiling. Over the idea of a pineapple, much safer that way. Indeed, the Georgians had a tendency to throw balls in honor of things that weren't present. There were entire banquets thrown for ships still at sea, for newly married couples still en route from Bath, and on one occasion for a pig that had saved a child from drowning, though the pig never received an invitation. The ball is scheduled for tomorrow, and the household is now aflutter with preparations. Ribbons, guest lists, menus written in French to confuse half the guests. Even the swans have been instructed to look extra elegant. It hands you a slim volume titled An Appropriate Guide to Ball Behavior. The cover is embossed with gold letters and a small disapproving pineapple. Inside you find such helpful entries as, do not challenge anyone to a duel before dessert. Avoid fainting for attention unless accompanied by an appropriate backstory. When addressing a duke, never compare his waistcoat to fruit. An obscure historical tidbit. Georgian etiquette guides were often satirical in tone, yet many were still followed. One even advised women to speak only after 3 full courses unless interrupted by scandal. You look up from the guide. The butler is arranging forks with the concentration of a man trying to forget a past life. Papa wants you to deliver the opening toast, says, eyes twinkling. He says you've proven yourself verbally competent. You take a deep breath. You've lied about root vegetables, covered up mild pineapple desecration, and faked a conspiracy. A toast should be easy. Historians still debate whether toasts in the Georgian era were intended to honor or embarrass. Some were so florid they required rehearsals, and others were so absurd that guests often clapped out of confusion. The wax pineapple watches from the center of the table, forever frozen in fruit-based diplomacy. The preparations for the reconciliation ball have escalated from charming to concerning. By midday, a harpsichord is being carried up the front steps, trailed by a small man in a powdered wig shouting, "Don't tip it, that's where I keep the wine." The Viscount is having his cravat restarched, is arguing with the florist over the emotional tone of the hydrangeas, and Judith is in the greenhouse, swearing at a fig. You somehow have been tasked with writing a toast worthy of an entirely fabricated pineapple feud. You sit in the library staring at an empty page. A quill droops from your fingers like a guilty fern. The room smells like old paper and distant desperation. As a book falls off the shelf behind you on its own, Probably a ghost or just poor shelving, you ignore it. You've seen stranger things this week. Eventually, you rise. Unto the fruit that brought us together by nearly tearing us apart. Unto the lies we told, the secrets we kept, and the root vegetables we dressed up in bravery. May we always remember, it's not the pineapple we feared, it's what it meant. Long may it rain unpeeled. You close the book with a theatrical sigh. It's either poetry or nonsense, but it will do. One fact for your notes: Georgian toasts were often printed and distributed afterward. The truly terrible ones were sometimes sold in pamphlet form for people to mock at breakfast. Fame, you realize, comes in many forms. Aunt Judith appears in the doorway with a garland of rosemary. I've decided to forgive everyone, she says flatly, except the florist, and maybe God. Well, you nod seems fair. And now for your curious cultural tidbit. In at least one Georgian household, there was a tradition of toasting the furniture at the end of the evening. Guests would raise a glass to the sideboard, the curtains, even the tea tray. Why? Possibly out of gratitude, possibly out of wine. Historians still debate whether this tradition was sincere or simply the final sign that it was time for everyone to go home. You head upstairs to change, thinking how strange it is that a single piece of fruit could cause this much theater. But then again, history has never been particularly reasonable. And beneath it all, the candles, the layered silk deception, the pineapple remains, undisputed, untouched, unquestionably ridiculous. Just as it should be. The reconciliation ball begins with a waltz and a weather report. Apparently, the Viscount has hired a man to stand at the entrance and announce the current temperature to each guest. Mild with hints of scandal, he declares proudly as the second cousin from Yorkshire enters. You descend the grand staircase in borrowed finery, lace at the cuffs, an expression of mild confusion on your face. The chandeliers shimmer like overconfident snowflakes, and someone has arranged the candlesticks in a spiral formation that appears to defy gravity. Greets you near the punch table. 3 guests have already asked about, she whispers, eyes darting. They think he's a fruit thief turned monk. Let them, you murmur. It's better than explaining wax vegetables. Indeed, still very much present, has been given the night off and is playing cards with the scullery maids, reportedly winning with suspicious consistency. A hush falls over the room. The Viscount stands at the top of the stairs, a glass raised in one hand and a scroll in the other. Ladies, ambiguous baronets. He launches into a poetic account of fruit, forgiveness, and the fluctuations of favor. It's florid, it rhymes, it references Cicero and a very specific marmalade incident. The guests applaud out of rhythm but with feeling. Then it's your turn. The crowd parts like overly perfumed soup. You step forward with your glass raised, the room tilting ever so slightly as all eyes fix on you. You deliver the toast, the whole absurd, heartfelt thing. You even add a line about the pineapple teaching us the fragility of grandeur and the resilience of tropical exports. There is silence, then thunderous clapping, possibly relief, possibly respect, likely both. A historical fact. One Georgian toast in 1761 was so beloved, it was turned into a song, then banned for inciting excessive weeping in public. It was reportedly about cheese. As the music resumes, Aunt Judith clinks glasses with you. "Well done," she says, expression unreadable. "You didn't even mention the worm." "You freeze, what worm?" "Oh, nothing," she says airily. "Just something I might have seen inside the original pineapple, right before I buried it." You choose to believe she's joking, mostly. And now, a cultural curiosity. Some upper-class Georgians believed pineapples were lucky, but only if no one ever ate them. Consuming them, they feared, would transfer their luck to the stomach, and then, well, you can imagine. Historians still debate whether this belief was born from genuine superstition, or just a way to avoid sharing. You drift into the ballroom slightly dazed. The chandeliers sparkle, the orchestra tunes. The pineapple replica glows gently in the center of the dessert table. Tonight, no one questions its presence. They simply nod respectfully and move on to the trifle. The next morning smells like oranges, sleep, and the kind of regret that only satin shoes and spiked punch can produce. You wander through the garden, now littered with forgotten fans and the occasional champagne cork. A decorative goose eyes you suspiciously. You nod in mutual understanding. The pineapple, real and glorious, is back in its conservatory throne, polished and proud. Next to it, a small handwritten note in Judith's unmistakably dramatic script. Still not eaten, still winning. You hear footsteps behind you. It's the Viscount, wearing his robe and a faint look of emotional whiplash. That was a fine toast, he says, subtle, complex, mildly absurd. Thank you, you reply. I modeled it after the fruits. He smiles. We're renaming the guest room after you. The Pineapple Suite. You blink. That's an honor. He nods gravely. Few have lied so elegantly on our behalf. You walk together in silence for a while. The grass is damp, the air heavy with dew and decisions. And then he says it. I've never actually tasted one. You stop. You've never eaten pineapples. Not once. Too sacred, too ceremonial. I wouldn't know how to begin. Is historical fact. There are first-hand accounts from the 18th century of noblemen weeping after eating pineapple for the first time, not from joy but from guilt. One wrote in his diary, "It felt like I had devoured a monument." The Viscount kneels down to adjust a rose bush. Perhaps someday, when the world feels less serious. Judith appears on the balcony above with a watering can and a smirk. You said that 10 years ago. An obscure tidbit. Some Georgian households held mock trials for expired pineapples to determine whether they had lived up to their symbolic expectations. punishments ranged from composting to ceremonial consumption. Historians still debate whether these events were rituals or elaborate excuses to avoid throwing anything away. As you stroll back toward the house, you pass a painting being delivered to the front hall. It depicts the pineapple seated on a velvet cushion, surrounded by adoring admirers. A golden plaque reads, "In fruit there is truth." You don't know if it's a joke, a warning, or the beginning of a new religion. But you do know this. The pineapple survived. The scandal passed. And your name will live on in the guest book of absurd legends. At least until someone buries a mango. It's been 3 days since the reconciliation ball, and the pineapple has become a little too comfortable with its fame. There are sketches of it now hanging in the hallway near the cloakroom. One depicts it in Roman armor, another as a naval officer. A third, most alarming, shows it reclining on a chaise wearing nothing but a monocle. You've started referring to it half-jokingly as His Majesty. So how does the staff? The butler now bows slightly each time he walks past it. Today you've been invited, or perhaps assigned, to join Lady on a trip into the nearby village. "We need bread," she says, "and a break from the kingdom of overripe metaphors." You ride in a carriage that smells faintly of cinnamon, damp wool, and unresolved aristocracy. The countryside rolls past like a scenic sigh, hills, hedgerows, and the occasional judgmental cow. The village is charming in the way only places with uneven cobblestones and a 300-year-old bakery can be. You pass a sign that reads, "Pineapple viewing 1 shilling. Bread extra." Already, you mutter. The smirks, word travels, our pineapple's gone rural. And indeed, it seems the household's recent drama has inspired a wave of imitation. In one shop window, a potato has been dressed up in a tiny crown. Another bakery advertises pineapple-shaped shortbread that looks, if we're being honest, like confused hedgehogs. A true historical fact. In Georgian England, villages sometimes the fads of the gentry, albeit with whatever materials were available. One recorded instance from 1782 describes a village fair where turnips were judged for regal posture. You pause at a market stall. A child is selling pineapple fortune's small scrolls wrapped in yellow paper predicting things like "you will meet a goose" or "today is not for raisins." You buy one, yours says, "Beware of fruit with ambitions." Reads it over your shoulder and laughs. Too late. A cultural tidbit. In some Georgian coastal towns, pineapples were believed to ward off sea spirits. Sailors would place painted pineapple symbols on their sails or tattoo them on their arms, not for flavor but for luck. Historians still debate whether this tradition was based on maritime folklore or drunken coincidence. As you ride back to the estate, holds a baguette like a sword and declares, "Let the age of the mango pretenders begin." You fear she may not be joking. You return to find the Viscount on the south lawn, giving a formal speech to the pineapple. It's been placed on a small dais draped in blue velvet. 2 footmen stand guard. A third is sketching it for the estate records. And then so, the Viscount says, "We honor your resilience, your glow, your sheer unyielding juiciness." Now you turn to Judith, who's watching from the shade of a parasol. Is this normal? She lifts a brow. Define normal in a house where the fruit gets more letters than I do. You approach the dais cautiously. The pineapple is now flanked by 2 bouquets and a miniature flag bearing the family crest, which has been altered to include a pineapple in the center. "Oh, you gave it a flag." "Well, we gave it sovereignty," whispers from behind you. "It's now officially the custodian of the conservatory." There's a formal ceremony planned for next week. Robes have been ordered. An oath is being written. Someone suggested a crown, but Judith vetoed it on theological grounds. Real fact, during certain Georgian ceremonies objects, yes, literal objects were sometimes honored with miniature titles. A silver spoon might become the Duchess of Dessert, a feather quill the scribe of sentiment. It was a mixture of jest and oddly sincere sentimentality. Meanwhile, lady who has now fainted 4 more times, bringing her total to 7, has begun writing sonnets to the pineapple. They're heartfelt, confusingly so. One compares it to a wounded knight, another to unrequited passion in the shape of a salad. And here's your obscure tidbit. A little-known Georgian poet named Altan published an entire volume titled Fruit of My Yearning, with verses dedicated to grapes, figs, and a particularly flirty pomegranate. It sold 6 copies and was later repurposed as kindling. Historians still debate whether this work was serious or a long-form prank. The title poem includes the line, "Oh, you're rind, my ruins." That evening, you slip away to the conservatory alone. You stand before the pineapple, not as a guest or conspirator, but as someone who has been irrevocably changed by one tropical fruit's very stubbornness. Though the candlelight flickers, the fruit says nothing, and somehow that feels like wisdom. You wake the next morning to find a formal envelope slipped under your door. The seal is wax, pressed with the estate crest, now including a suspiciously spiky fruit beside the lion and the stag. You open it slowly, half expecting it to explode into pineapple-scented confetti. Instead, it reads, "You are cordially invited to a breakfast in honor of His fruitful grace, the custodian of the conservatory, Lord Pineapple I." Though the note is signed by, but you suspect Judith helped with the titles. You dress with more effort than you planned. Something about attending a breakfast hosted by a pineapple makes you feel like your shoes should match your sense of irony. Downstairs, the drawing room has been transformed into what can only be described as colonial brunch. Pineapple motifs are everywhere, stitched into napkins, painted onto teacups, even carved into butter blocks. A small string quartet is tuning up in the corner. greets you with a pineapple brooch pinned dramatically at her shoulder. We considered making it a masquerade, but Papa worried someone might impersonate the pineapple. Oh, that's fair, you reply. There's a lot of competition these days. She gestures toward the table. In the center, on a silver pedestal, sits the pineapple, gleaming, aloof, unbothered. A velvet sash has been draped across its midsection. It reads, "Still untouched." One historical truth: Georgian nobility often hosted breakfasts with absurd themes, ranging from mythical creatures of the East to the melancholy of porridge. These events blurred the lines between satire and social climbing, with guests competing to be the most ironically devoted. Judith arrives wearing a cape, not a shawl. A cape. She pours herself tea with one hand and stabs a croissant with the other. The pineapple, she says gravely, has now received more correspondence than our local MP. While you sip your tea and nod, that feels correct. Now for something obscure. In 1765, a group of poets in London founded the Fellowship of the Fruit, a semi-secret society dedicated to the emotional potential of produce. Their motto was, "Even apples have feelings." They disbanded after a heated disagreement about the political undertones of plums. Historians still debate whether it was satire sincere, or just a side effect of consuming too much brandied pear. The breakfast proceeds with all the gravity of a diplomatic summit. There are speeches, there's music. At one point, the butler reads a poem on behalf of the pineapple. It rhymes poorly. But everyone applauds, especially the pineapple. Silently, of course. Later that day, you find yourself alone in the library, leafing through one of the Viscount's many unread volumes. It's titled Tropical Morality, a study of fruit and vice. The author appears to be a reverend with far too much free time. A passage catches your eye. The pineapple is no ordinary delight. Its presence stirs the soul, awakens envy, and demands restraint. In its thorns we find metaphor, in its flesh temptation. You close the book slowly. There's a knock at the door and slips in holding a folded newspaper. It happened, she says. The scandal has gone public. She spreads the paper on the desk. The headline reads, "Noble house, noble fruit, the pineapple that shook the shires." The article details the incident, exaggerating nearly everything. According to the piece, the pineapple was briefly kidnapped by rebels, questioned under candlelight, and returned by a heroic gardener with a wooden leg. No one in the house has a wooden leg. Judith walks in and scans the page. "Well," she says, "at least they got my name right." The article concludes with a quote. When fruit becomes royalty, what does that make the rest of us? You fold the paper, unsure whether to laugh or call for a national referendum. And here's your factual anchor. Georgian newspapers were notorious for mixing actual news with social satire. Sometimes even the subjects of the articles didn't know whether they were being honored or mocked. As a curious tidbit, One such article in 1771 reported that a chicken had been named Lord Mayor of a small town as a protest against corruption. The townspeople threw it a parade. The mayor was not amused. Historians still debate whether the chicken actually served a full term. Back in the conservatory, the pineapple remains unbothered. It sits atop its pedestal like an emperor waiting for history to catch up. The line's against the wall. You know, she says, if we gave it a name, it would be easier to manage expectations. You raise an eyebrow. It has a sash, a title, a flag, and a breakfast named after it. What more could it possibly expect? She thinks a memoir. You both laugh, but only a little, because at this point you wouldn't be surprised. As outside, a light rain begins to fall. You look through the glass and see a visitor arrive at the front gates, holding a pineapple. The war may not be over. It may have just gone diplomatic. The visitor is announced, as all visitors are in this house. Loudly, ceremonially, and with just enough hesitation to suggest potential scandal. He enters with a pineapple cradled in his arms like an offering to the gods. He's dressed in city fashion, 3 weeks out of date, which in Georgian circles is roughly the same as arriving in rags. His name, you're told, is Mr. Dash, an ambitious merchant, a former poet, and a self-proclaimed fruit diplomat. He bows low. I come on behalf of the London Pineapple Society. The Viscount narrows his eyes. That's not a real thing. Oh, but it is, Dash says, proudly tapping his waistcoat, which is stitched with tiny pineapples. Founded last year during the mango riots, we are a peaceful group but firm in our belief. No fruit should rule alone. He holds out his pineapple. It's smaller than yours. A little misshapen. One side is bruised as though it's lived through something. I seek audience with Lord Pineapple Eye. The line's in to whisper, is this a negotiation or a bake-off? Judith, now reading a pamphlet titled Citrus and Civil Unrest, does not look up. Depends how it ends. The Viscount, ever the dramatic host, agrees to an audience. The conservatory is cleared, and the 2 pineapples are placed on adjacent pedestals. It's part diplomacy, part vegetable stare-down. You all wait for what you're not sure. Maybe for the pineapples to communicate through spores. Here's your historical anchor. Georgian England did witness a wave of pineapple rivalries. Competing growers would sneak into each other's glasshouses to sabotage fruit. There were court cases. Even duels. One notable feud involved 2 brothers who built competing pineries across the street from one another and stopped speaking for 15 years. Dash begins to speak in slow, reverent tones. Let us unite our harvests. Let us build a future where fruit is no longer object but symbol, where a banana may dine beside a plum, where passion fruit is not misunderstood. No one knows what to say. A footman sneezes. Someone claps once, then stops. Here's an obscure tidbit. One 18th century satirist published a pamphlet titled Rights of the Rind. arguing that all fruits deserved legal representation in matters of preservation and display. It was mostly satire, probably. Historians still debate whether it was ever quoted during actual court proceedings involving stolen fruit. Though the Viscount clears his throat, "Your fruit is noble, but this house already has a king." The Dash bows again. "Then I ask only for peaceful trade and a photo." "Now what's a photo?" mutters. "Oh, sorry, sketch," Dash says. "Sometimes I forget what century I'm in." You nod, understandable. Later that evening, Dash is offered a guest room, a change of clothes, and a small plate of non-symbolic fruit. He eats grapes with the seriousness of a man calculating alliances. You find him seated by the fire reading a book upside down. He gestures for you to sit. "I knew I had to come," he says, "when word reached London of a pineapple receiving letters. Well, we all knew the game had changed." "While you sip your tea, what game is that exactly?" He shrugs. "The game of fruit diplomacy. The fight for narrative, the war of symbolism." "Oh, seems exhausting." "It is, but imagine," he says, eyes glowing with the kind of fervor usually reserved for revolutionaries and bad playwrights. "A world where fruit no longer divides us but defines us." "Now you consider excusing yourself, politely. Instead you stay, because by now you've learned that in this house no conversation is too strange to follow through." Real historical fact. By the late 1700s, pineapples were being painted into family portraits, placed atop coats of arms, and even referenced in architectural design. They symbolized wealth, hospitality, and often extravagant absurdity. Some Georgian homes had pineapple-shaped stone finials lining their driveways, warning visitors that yes, you are entering the house of someone who has opinions about fruit. Now Judith appears beside the fire holding a chessboard. She places it between you and Dash. "Fruit or no fruit," she says, "let's see if you can defend a rook." Dash smiles, "Only if the pawns represent citrus." As they begin to play, walks in holding a sealed letter. "News from the Earl of A," she says. "He's heard about the pineapple and he's sending a melon." Everyone freezes. Not just a melon, the stuff of whispered legend and garden envy. It's a cultural tidbit for you. The family once held a private melon strain so rare it was only grown inside a rotating glass orb, warmed by mirrors and sung to nightly by a lute player. Its flavor was rumored to be sunlight with regret. Historians still debate whether the melon existed, or if the Earl simply bribed food critics with overly poetic metaphors. You lean back, listening to the rain against the window. In the conservatory, the pineapple sits, silent, regal, and possibly preparing for war. A new fruit is coming, and with it, a new chapter in this deliciously ridiculous saga. The melon arrives 2 days later, encased in a lacquered wooden crate and escorted by 3 men in matching cloaks. They introduce themselves as the of Melon, no one blinks, not anymore. The crate is opened in the great hall beneath the family crest. A hush falls. There it sits, pale green, slightly oblong, and emitting a scent so oddly nostalgic that one guest quietly begins weeping. You step forward cautiously. It smells like my grandmother's porch. Judith leans in. It smells like a well-made promise. The Viscount has already called for a meeting of the Household Council. Distributes folders titled Melon Integration Protocols. Someone brings out maps. Someone else brings out port. The melon is temporarily placed on a matching pedestal in the conservatory. Facing Lord Pineapple, neither fruit blinks. One footman whispers, "This is the summit we didn't know we needed." Real historical anchor. In 18th century England, melons, particularly the cantaloupe, were regarded with quiet reverence. The most prized specimens were grown in secret, behind walls or deep within private greenhouses, and were only served to select guests under very specific circumstances, often involving French wine and deeply awkward toasts. Today's meeting is chaired by the Viscount himself. "We are now a two-fruit household," he announces. "Let diplomacy guide us. Let garnishes remain neutral." Judith immediately proposes a fruit neutrality accord, suggesting separate viewing hours for the melon and the pineapple to avoid jealousy. Offers a counterpoint. Jealousy is the foundation of modern heritage. You quietly doodle two thrones with smiling fruit faces, and wonder if the melon dreams of revolution. An obscure cultural tidbit. In one particularly eccentric Georgian estate, guests were once required to bow before a row of heirloom cucumbers. The practice ended after a guest attempted to elope with one. Historians still debate whether this was performance art or simply rural loneliness. Later, as the conservatory darkens and the fruit rests under candlelight, you can't help but notice the pineapple seems smugger. Its crown gleams a little brighter. Its base tilts just enough to look condescending. The melon remains calm, stoic, almost regal in its refusal to participate in theatrics. It's only a matter of time. And at precisely 3:00 a.m., a sound wakes you. A soft clink, then another, like cautious silverware, like someone trying to steal a spoonful of history. You slip from bed, robes trailing, and tiptoe down the hall. The mansion is hushed, moonlight pooling on the floors like spilled cream. In the conservatory, you find Dash. Candle in one hand, journal in the other, standing between the pineapple and the melon. He looks up, they've shifted. You stare, they've what? He points, the melon's tilt is new, and the pineapple, its shadow has changed. You raise an eyebrow, you've been up watching the fruit all night. I live for policy, he replies. It's hard to argue with that kind of conviction. Together you stare at the fruit. Silent, balanced, potentially plotting. Here's your historical anchor. During a 6-month period in 1777, a Cambridge professor documented the growth patterns of melons and concluded they responded emotionally to poetry. His findings were dismissed. He later published them as haiku. Dash pulls a quill from his pocket. I'm drafting a charter, the Articles of Produce. It outlines equality, mutual reverence, and seasonal respect. You peer over his shoulder. One clause reads, "No fruit shall supersede another in scent unless agreed upon in writing." Judith appears behind you, hair in a braid, sipping wine straight from the bottle. Tell me this ends with a fruit salad and not a coup. The sighs, one hopes. Here's something obscure. Georgian pranksters once replaced an entire nobleman's wine cellar with bottles filled with watermelon juice. The nobleman was so impressed by the delicate mouthfeel that he made it his house blend. Historians still debate whether he ever realized. Back in the conservatory, you watch the two fruits illuminated by candlelight. They sit equal in space, unequal in history. Tomorrow, whispers, we vote on the anthems. You nod slowly, sleepily, certain now that you are no longer a guest but a citizen of a kingdom that never asked for you, but now relies on your loyalty to ensure peace between Fruit 1 and Fruit 2. Somewhere a door creaks, a squirrel enters. The world tilts slightly, you go to bed. It's going to be another long day in the fruit court. Morning arrives like a gentle sigh wrapped in fog. The mansion is unusually quiet. No harpist practicing in the hall, no arguments over marmalade placement, no rustle of scandal around the breakfast table. The calm before the day. You descend the stairs to find the dining room transformed into an official chamber. Chairs are arranged in a semicircle. At the center stands a podium draped in gold and green ribbons. Two velvet cushions rest atop small marble stands, one for the pineapple, one for the melon. Greets you with a parchment scroll nearly the length of a dining table. Today, she announces, we ratify the fruit conquered. Dash is already seated, looking tired but satisfied. The anthem's been finalized, he says. It's a duet for harpsichord and tambourine. You pause a tambourine. It felt tropical, he explains. The Viscount enters wearing a sash that reads Guardian of the Grove. Judith follows, muttering under her breath about how every war begins with a song and too much linen. The fruit conquered is read aloud by the butler, now repurposed as master of proceedings. It outlines principles of equality, rotational display privileges, ceremonial addresses, and rather specifically, a ban on introducing papaya without 6 weeks written notice. Here's your historical fact. Aristocratic charters in Georgian England were sometimes drawn up for inanimate objects, especially during garden competitions or long winters. One noblewoman once declared her the Baroness of the Eastern Fence in a 5-page document sealed with berry ink. As the final clause is read, let no rind be ranked above another, the room erupts in polite applause. A guest discreetly dabs away a tear with a lace handkerchief. Clears her throat, we now proceed to the anthem. A harpsichord begins to play. The tambourine enters late, slightly offbeat. The melody is ambitious. Though fruit divine, both sharp and round, in thee our heritage is found. From tropic sun to tempered vine, let citrus and gourd in harmony shine. The last line is sung by Judith deadpan, in a voice that sounds like resignation steeped in brandy. An obscure tidbit, Georgian aristocrats occasionally composed house anthems for social occasions, often involving plants, pets, or particularly expensive furniture. One such song, Ode to the Chaise, was performed annually until the chaise broke. Historians still debate whether the furniture was retired with honors or simply reupholstered under a new identity. As the music ends, the two fruits are gently rotated on their cushions to face the audience. Dash bows, the fruit conquered is official. A small cheer, a slice of melon is offered to the youngest guest. It is declined respectfully. You sit back watching history, or at least extremely committed fruit theater, unfold before your eyes. And still, you wonder, how long before someone brings up the papaya again? Though the day after the fruit conquered is oddly anticlimactic. There are no processions, no declarations, no citrus coups. Just rain. You sit in the drawing room with a cup of tea, watching droplets race down the window pane. The pineapple and the melon rest peacefully in the conservatory, now slightly behind matching curtains labeled morning viewing and afternoon respect. Judith knits silently in the corner, her yarn a soft yellow-green blend she calls tropical treaty. Reads from a gardening manual written in iambic pentameter. Occasionally, she sighs like someone waiting for the post. Dash enters carrying a box. I've compiled the Concord into a limited edition print, he says. Only 50 copies bound in fig leather. You accept one politely, it smells unripe. Here's your historical anchor. Limited edition household documents were occasionally produced by eccentric nobles who wanted to preserve the memory of everything. One lord published a 7-volume account of his pet ferret's daily activities, complete with watercolor illustrations and quotes. Judith flips through the Concord. Clause 19 contradicts Clause 6. Dash looks up, it does. Technically, yes. One promises fruit hierarchy neutrality. The other implies the pineapple has implied seniority. Gasps, we've written a monarchy. The room stills, outside thunder grumbles, the melon's shadow lengthens. An obscure tidbit, in Georgian satirical plays, fruit often symbolized social climbing. A peach might represent deceit, a pear awkward virtue. One notorious play, The Orange Plot, was banned for inciting unrest among orchard owners. Historians still debate whether this unrest was political, or simply poor harvest timing. Back in the drawing room, a decision is made. A revision committee must be formed. You are voted onto it. You do not recall agreeing. Your responsibilities now include ensuring all fruit references are metaphorically consistent, reviewing anthem tempo, investigating Clause 23, which may or may not reference apricot duels. Judith closes her knitting. Fruit Conquered Revision Committee, God save us. You nod solemnly and preserve the rind. And outside, the melon sits in calm silence. The pineapple tilts ever so slightly as if to say, try me. The first meeting of the Fruit Conquered Revision Committee is held in the Blue Parlor, a room previously reserved for sulking and the occasional harp-related tantrum. A long table has been brought in, covered with charts, calligraphy pens, and at least 3 kinds of lemon cake, because no meeting should begin without citrus. You take your seat beside Judith, who brings a ruler and a bottle of something labeled Revision Tonic. Across from you, Dash is already arguing with himself about Clause 12, which appears to contradict the preamble and offend a small but vocal segment of melon enthusiasts. So the meeting begins slowly, painfully. Stands and clears her throat. Point of order: should Clause 6 explicitly define fruit superiority, or is it implied through historical prominence? Judith, without looking up, murmurs, if it's implied, it will be weaponized. You nod, we've already had one fruit war, let's not tempt fate. A historical fact. There was a real Georgian legal dispute involving 2 families over the placement of a pear tree near a shared fence. The case went on for 7 years and concluded only when a particularly large windstorm uprooted the tree entirely. The court declared the case resoundingly resolved by providence. Clause by clause, the meeting drags on. By hour 3, a heated debate erupts over whether the anthem can be rewritten to include rhubarb. Judith insists rhubarb isn't a fruit. Dash insists it feels like one. A obscure tidbit. In the 1790s, a Ceylon poet attempted to write a tragic opera featuring a love triangle between a strawberry, a fig, and a corrupt courgette. It was performed once to great confusion. Audience members reportedly wept, though mostly from bafflement. Historians still debate whether it was a satire of politics, produce, or both. Eventually, you break for refreshments. Dash proposes a new clause: no fruit shall be compared unfavorably to a gourd in public documentation. Judith proposes that no one speak until their second tea. While you second that motion, it passes unanimously. As the sun begins to set behind the hedges, the pineapple and the melon remain distant, dignified. They do not care for your charters or though they simply are. Though the next day the estate awakens to bird song, fresh fog, and a mildly alarming banner stretched across the front gate. All fruit are noble, none are edibles. It's unclear who hung it. Suspects Dash, Dash suspects Judith. Judith blames the wind. Regardless, the message seems to resonate. Villagers have started arriving, curious, slightly damp, and bearing offerings. A boy presents a basket of wild strawberries. A woman in a bonnet offers a rhubarb tart and apologizes for its dual identity. The Viscount, sensing opportunity, declares today Fruit Appreciation Day. There are speeches, pamphlets, and a small puppet show featuring a heroic tangerine. The pineapple is vetoed on moral grounds. You spend the morning guiding guests through the conservatory, explaining the nuances of the conquered and the historical arc of pineapple symbolism. Why not just eat it? One man asks, nodding at Lord Pineapple Eye. Judith appears behind you, voice low. Because sometimes restraint is the only thing keeping us civilized. The melon has been given a small fan to reduce glare. It now sits on a rotatable dais that slowly turns to face the sun. One guest leaves a sonnet, another leaves jam, one simply bows and whispers, "Thank you for your service." Here's your historical anchor. During certain 18th century harvest festivals, particularly prized fruits were paraded through towns, kissed by children and sometimes wrapped in ribbons. A fig once received a marriage proposal from a local farmer and a rather stern sermon from the village priest. Here's your cultural tidbit. In a northern English county, there was a tradition of holding fruit courts, mock trials where spoiled apples and moldy peaches were sentenced, usually to jam. It was considered both civic duty and group therapy. Historians still debate whether the judges wore actual wigs or just curly lettuce. By evening, the crowd thins, the banner is taken down, the jam is shared. The pineapple returns to its pedestal, somehow looking even more smug than usual. You sit by the fire, warm and confused in equal measure. Brings you a glass of cordial. "I think," she says softly, "we may have created a new holiday." While you sip, the cordial tastes like peach and achievement. "Well, will it last?" you ask. She shrugs, "That depends on the kiwis." You both stare into the flames. Somewhere outside, a squirrel howls. Probably. At breakfast, the melon is missing. You stare at the empty pedestal as toast droops from your hand. Lord Pineapple Eye remains, glinting in the morning light like an innocent partygoer who swears they left before the punch bowl was set on fire. Though the conservatory is silent, too silent, even the orchids seem nervous. Judith arrives seconds later holding a folded shawl and a look of barely restrained anticipation. "I knew it," she mutters. "The piece was too juicy." A footman appears out of breath. The melon has been moved. "Moved where?" demands, her robe only half-buttoned and trailing lace like a bridal ghost. "To the gazebo, miss, voluntarily, I think." "The voluntarily," you echo. Dash bursts into the room, hair askew and notebook flapping. This is an act of political repositioning, a symbolic withdrawal to neutral ground. Or someone got bored and wanted better lighting. Judith counters. You all rush to the gardens. There it sits, the melon, proudly alone on a small marble plinth inside the gazebo angled toward the eastern hedge. A sign rests at its base, hastily painted. I need space, please respect my rind. Real historical anchor. Georgian families occasionally staged dramatic exiles of symbolic items. A misbehaving statue might be banished to the orchard for a season. In one estate, a poorly received painting of a duck was exiled to the cellar, then ceremonially reinstated after the artist died and became popular. Dadash takes furious notes. This is a melon manifesto, a quiet protest. Judith lifts a brow. It's a fruit breakup. An obscure tidbit. One 1794 society club known as the Banquet required its members to write apology letters to any dish they left unfinished. These notes were often decorated with dried herbs and read aloud during annual reviews. Historians still debate whether it was satire, sentiment, or a very British form of emotional digestion. You watch as a gust of wind shifts the melon's ribbons slightly to the left. It's definitely sulking, says. Do we negotiate, you ask? Judith exhales. No, we host an afternoon tea with a vacant chair. Let it see what it's missing. And just like that, you're planning a garden party designed to woo a melon back from emotional seclusion. Somewhere Lord Pineapple I watches through the glass unmoved, possibly smug, possibly victorious. Though the tea is set precisely at 4. Cups of rosehip and bergamot line the table like nervous diplomats. Small cakes, some melon-shaped, others aggressively round, are arranged in symmetrical defiance. One tart, unfortunately, looks like an apple. It's removed immediately. Though the gazebo remains silent. Though the melon hasn't moved. Not even a nudge. Fans herself dramatically. This is worse than the Cousin Harold incident. What happened with Cousin Harold, you ask? He once left a ball mid-quadrille, claimed he was emotionally allergic to violins. We're still recovering. You nod, you understand now. Georgia wasn't just about etiquette, it was about performance. And sometimes the fruit was better at it. Real historical anchor. Georgian garden parties often doubled as platforms for resolving feuds. There are records of estranged family members sitting 6 feet apart in carefully manicured rows of hedges, occasionally shouting Latin insults across the geraniums. Judith passes you a plate of lemon biscuits. This tea is not about reconciliation, it's about proving we're unbothered, which is, ironically, how we show we're bothered. Dadash arrives last, bearing a peace offering, a small scroll tied with twine. A sonnet from Lord Pineapple I drafted this morning. Smells faintly of nutmeg. You unroll it and read aloud. O melon, moon soft, cloaked in pale grace. Retreat is not defeat, just time and space. Though gazebos claim you and shadows bend. Know this, my rind-bound, bashful friend. Though the throne still waits, the jam is not yet set. A beat of silence, then polite applause. An obscure tidbit. Some Georgian poets were hired to ghostwrite letters and sonnets between pets owned by feuding families. One such correspondence between a pug and a parrot lasted 3 years and was later published as Feathers and Fur, a cautionary love. Historians still debate whether it was a satire, a social experiment, or merely an excuse for rhyme. By the end of tea, the melon hasn't rejoined the party, but it has tilted. Slightly, and ever so slightly, and toward the table, the breakthrough. You all pretend not to notice, which is the Georgian equivalent of sending a love letter. Judith raises her teacup to patience, pastry, and the power of emotional furniture. You raise yours too, unsure whether she means the melon or the wicker chair it's resting on. Either way, the war cools. For now, it's been a week since the fruit conquered. The pineapple remains stoic in its velvet-lined throne. The melon still resides in the gazebo, basking in filtered morning light like a weary philosopher. The estate, too, has settled into a kind of post-dramatic rhythm, punctuated only by mild debates over jam texture and the ethics of soft cheese. You sit on the terrace with Judith, and the former is re-embroidering a cushion with the phrase, "Let rind be kind." The latter is sorting fan letters, yes, actual letters to the fruit. "I suppose we could answer them," murmurs, flipping through a stack. "As long as we stay vague enough to avoid legal complications." One letter asks if the pineapple is available for public speaking. Another offers the melon a position on a town council. Real historical fact. In 1791, a famously eccentric baronet was elected mayor of a small village under the assumed name of his pet goose. The goose was given a sash, a seat at council, and reportedly passed 3 minor trade laws before anyone noticed. Down in the conservatory, Dash is preparing for his project, the first annual fruit symposium. There will be scrolls, panel discussions, and a keynote address on the ethics of edibility. Now you're asked to moderate, you agree. Of course you do. The day of the symposium arrives with dramatic clouds and overly enthusiastic bunting. Guests from neighboring estates begin arriving. Some wear pineapple pins. Others come draped in melon green sashes. A few arrive confused, thinking it was a harvest fair, and immediately start judging the marrows. The symposium is held on the south lawn. A lectern has been erected. The pineapple and melon are placed on matching pillars at the front, each with a dainty paper parasol for shade. Now Judith opens the proceedings with a thunderous reading of Clause 7b. No fruit shall be eulogized prematurely. A polite applause follows. Your job is to keep the speakers from fighting. Dash, of course, opens with a passionate speech about produce identity. A guest from Surrey presents a paper arguing that the pear has been historically overlooked due to emotional blandness. The one man in the back boos, he's holding a banana. An obscure cultural tidbit. During certain Georgian debates, participants would bring symbolic items instead of notes. Teacups to indicate fragility, candied apples for moral purity, or spoons to signal silent dissent. By the third speaker, someone produces a lute and begins softly strumming a ballad titled "Peel Me Gently." No one asks them to stop. The symposium concludes with a ceremonial fruit procession, wherein each guest walks silently past the pineapple and melon, nodding once and dropping a ribbon at their bases. Though the melon shifts again, a degree or two closer to the house, it's subtle, deliberate. Now Judith notices that's not a tilt, that's intent. Now you nod, the diplomacy of fruit is slow, but it is not subtle. The next morning, the melon is gone from the gazebo. It now sits quite comfortably on a side pedestal in the conservatory, exactly 2 feet to the left of the pineapple. Not beneath it, not opposite, but beside. The fruit reconciliation has begun. No formal announcement is made. No trumpets, no biscuits shaped like doves, just quiet acknowledgement. The places a fresh linen cloth under both pedestals. Dash bows upon entry. Judith, ever restrained, utters only, "Well, it's about time." Real historical anchor. Georgian society had a deep respect for symbolic proximity. In seating arrangements, placing 2 people beside each other without a buffer often implied a shift in status, favor, or alliance. A bishop once caused an uproar simply by placing his wine glass too close to a duchess's plate. By mid-morning, the estate is buzzing with cautious optimism. Guests peer into the conservatory like visitors to a zoo exhibit titled "Historic Compromise in Tropical Form." The Viscount calls for a breakfast in celebration. Nothing too grand, just a toast and a fruitless fruitcake in honor of restraint. You sit across from Dash, who now wears both a melon and a pineapple pin. "I think they've forgiven each other," he says, "or at least agreed to coexist." "Oh, isn't that the same thing?" you ask. He shrugs. Forgiveness is emotional. Coexistence is political. Both are exhausting. Judith brings in a tray of scones. "Behold, peace offerings, no jam, just butter, let us not complicate things." An obscure tidbit. A rare Georgian manuscript titled Of Feasts and Feuds includes a recipe for a symbolic reconciliation tart, layered with contrasting flavors but baked in a single dish. It was to be sliced in silence and eaten without eye contact. Historians still debate whether the silence was for respect or to prevent arguing about the crust. The breakfast ends without drama. The fruit remains in place. Guests take their leave, walking backward slightly as if afraid to jinx the moment. You stay behind, just long enough to notice the pineapple's shadow falling gently across the melon's base. It's not a dominance, it's just mourning. But in this house, that's more than enough symbolism for one day. You awaken to birdsong and a distinct lack of crisis. A strange, rare quiet has settled over the estate, so rare, in fact, that you suspect it may be a trap. Downstairs, the staff are polishing silver with surprising enthusiasm. The conservatory smells of citrus and victory. Lord Pineapple Eye and the Melon, now referred to as simply Melon with no title by mutual agreement, sit side by side, their respective pedestals decorated with matching ribbons in pale gold. Though there's content too. No shifting, no notes, no anonymous letters tucked into flower arrangements, just peace. And at breakfast, the Viscount raises a glass of warm lemonade and toasts the subtle wisdom of fruit-based leadership. Judith toasts back, eyes half closed, with a spoon. Dash brings news. The fruit conquered has been requested by 2 other households for replication. The Earl of wants to model his olive versus fig feud resolution on it. The Dowager Countess of is considering a berry-based peace garden. This, he says proudly, is how policy spreads. While you sip tea, let's hope their fruit is better behaved. Here's your historical fact. Some Georgian treaties between households, not nations, were indeed modeled on whimsical events. One truce over disputed fencing rights was negotiated during a pudding competition and involved a custard duel. The winner's dessert was inscribed on the final agreement. Later that afternoon finds you in the garden and invites you to the closing ceremony of fruit recognition. You didn't know this was a thing. No one did. She shrugs, it just felt right. The ceremony is modest. A small gathering on the lawn, folding chairs. A harpsichordist who looks like he regrets everything. Dash reads a short poem titled From Rind to Rise. Judith sprinkles dried petals around the pedestals. The Viscount places a wax seal on the fruit conquered and drops it into a box labeled History, mildly absurd. Here's an obscure tidbit. One Georgian historian kept a private book of brief reconciliations, documenting minor domestic truces, such as between sisters over sewing thread or servants over tea leaves. It included doodles. Many of them wore hats. And historians still debate whether it was a useful chronicle or a glorified apology journal. And as the sun sets, the melon catches the golden light just so. The pineapple leans slightly in its direction, as if listening. Though there are no speeches, no declarations, just the quiet knowledge that somehow this matters. Not because it's rational, not because it's historical, but because it's wonderfully, deeply human. Even if the fruit is not. The final morning of your stay dawns soft and gray, with rain threading lightly through the air like a half-remembered song. You pack slowly, not because there's much to carry, but because it feels like the end of something that never quite began and yet changed everything. Downstairs, the household is subdued. The pineapple and melon remain in their now permanent pedestals, surrounded by a modest border of lavender. A small, tasteful plaque reads, Oh, here sat the fruits of peace. Finds you near the greenhouse. Are you really leaving? You nod, I think it's time. She looks over your shoulder at the fruit. It won't be the same without you. Or, well, it might be the same, but with more arguments. Judith joins, offering you a tiny box tied in twine. A parting gift. You open it to find a miniature pineapple brooch. A stamped copy of the fruit conquered. And a tea sachet labeled Cordial Détente. Judith smiles. Drink when faced with unnecessary tension, especially near produce. Here's your historical anchor. Guests of eccentric Georgian households were often gifted symbolic tokens upon departure. One famed hostess handed out teaspoons engraved with the phrases, "Speak less," "Steep more," and "You were only slightly offensive." The Viscount arrives last, looking proud and faintly tearful. "You've helped us more than you know," he says, grasping your hand. This house had lost its sense of ceremony. And now, well, now even our cucumbers are walking. You aren't sure what that means, but you smile anyway. An obscure tidbit. Some households in 18th century England appointed parting chroniclers guests tasked with writing exaggerated accounts of their stay. These were often fictionalized to include duels, hauntings, or mysterious cheese thefts. Historians still debate whether the chroniclers were writing history or wishful thinking. As you prepare to leave, a light breeze rustles through the conservatory. For a moment, the pineapple and melon appear to nod. Maybe it's the wind, maybe it's something more. You step into the carriage. The wheels begin to turn. Behind you, the house retreats into mist and memory, and the story of the pineapple and the melon settles into legend. Not carved into stone, not sung in ballads, but whispered at dinner tables. And sometimes, just sometimes, remembered in dreams. The road away from the estate is uneven, flanked by ancient hedgerows and sleepy sheep who seem unconcerned with geopolitics, fruit-based or otherwise. The rain has softened into a fine mist, the kind that doesn't fall so much as settle on your skin like a quiet agreement. Inside the carriage, you watch as fields pass by, their colors fading gently into the sort of gray that makes everything feel like a memory already. You replay the scenes in your mind, not the dramatic ones but the small moments. Judith humming to herself while sharpening a pencil, whispering apologies to a lemon tart he couldn't finish. The way the pineapple always seemed to angle itself toward the morning light, as if it knew. You realize something curious. You miss them. Not just the people, not even just the fruit, but the entire absurd, elegant rhythm of it all. Here's your historical anchor. Some guests of Georgian country houses suffered what was playfully referred to as post-parlor melancholy, a brief emotional slump triggered by returning to normal life after a prolonged stay in a theatrically ridiculous home. Remedies included letter writing, dramatic sighing, and commissioning unnecessarily large bonnets. Your own remedy is simpler. You retrieve the tiny pineapple brooch Judith gave you and pin it to your lapel. It feels like armor, or at the very least like a reminder that strange things can still be sacred. An obscure tidbit. A few rare letters from the 18th century reference fruit philosophy, gatherings of nobles who discussed metaphysical topics while meditating on the shapes of pears and the moral implications of figs. One diary entry from 1778 simply reads, "Today I understood the plum, or at least forgave it." Historians still debate whether this was satire or early mindfulness practice involving groceries. Your carriage slows at the edge of a small village. A boy with a lopsided hat waves you down and hands you a folded note sealed with lavender wax. While you open it, it reads, "All fruit contains multitudes, travel safely. J." Now, Judith, of course, you fold the note and tuck it into your pocket. The carriage rolls on. And somewhere behind you, a pineapple and a melon sit side by side, listening to the rain. You arrive in town just after dusk, the cobbled streets slick with memory and lamplight. There's a stillness here, less curated than the estate's serenity, more practical. Fewer ribbons, more mud. As at the inn, the landlady greets you with a polite smile and shows you to your room. It's small, warm, and blessedly uneventful. No dueling pairs, no poetry about rind, just a soft bed, a sturdy table, and a view of the stables. You unpack slowly, setting the pineapple brooch on the nightstand like a tiny totem. The silence presses in, but not unkindly. Later, in the common room, you find a fire already crackling, and a few travelers exchanging half-hearted stories about road conditions. You sip tea and drift into your thoughts. As someone asks where you've come from, you pause. How do you explain that story? That for weeks you lived in a place where fruit sat on velvet thrones, where diplomacy was negotiated between produce, and where poetry could rewrite hierarchy. So you say just a quiet estate outside, lovely garden, passionate about pineapples. A few nod, one man squints. Pineapples dangerous things. My cousin choked on one once, lost a bet, never again. While you smile, you don't correct him. Real historical anchor. Travelers in Georgian times often exaggerated or understated their journeys, depending on the audience. One famous diarist, upon returning from a perfectly ordinary estate, claimed to have survived a spectral squash uprising and witnessed the trial of a tomato. His wife edited that part out before publication. A obscure tidbit. A superstition held that if you dreamed of fruit seated upright, it meant you were ready for a new chapter. Dreaming of fruit lying on its side meant you were not. Historians still debate whether this belief influenced dining table centerpieces. That night, as you fall asleep, you do dream of polished floors, rustling skirts, and a conservatory filled with golden light. You walk past the pineapple. It nods, you pass the melon, it exhales. And in the distance you hear music. Faint, ridiculous, comforting. You wake in the middle of the night smiling. unsure if the tune was real or simply your heart remembering something entirely unreasonable and deeply true. The next morning greets you with birdsong, toast that's just on the edge of ambition, and a small letter slid under your door. The envelope is pale yellow, the handwriting immediately familiar, precise, dramatic, slightly overconfident. From Judith. You sit at the edge of the bed, open the letter, and read. Dearest Rhine Drangler, the pineapple has entered a contemplative phase. The melon continues its slow moral journey toward domesticity. Dash has published a pamphlet titled Fruit as Fellow Citizens, which has been banned from the library for excessive footnotes. We miss your grounding presence. Please know the conservatory is quieter in your absence, though it occasionally creaks as if trying to remember your footsteps. Believes she saw a papaya in the village square. I told her to lock the gates. Yours in fruit and folly. Jay. You fold the letter with a smile and tuck it into your coat pocket, right next to the lavender-scented note from the boy at the village border. Your pockets are now less about utility, more about mythology. Later, you wander the market square. It's unhurried, full of thick wool, chattering geese, and baked goods that smell like childhood and mild risk. You pass a cart of produce, apples, squash, and tucked in the corner a single pineapple. It's smaller, asymmetrical, humble. Though the shopkeeper catches your glance. That one's just for show, too green, but folk like to look at it, makes em feel fancy. You nod slowly, it does that. Real historical anchor. Some Georgian merchants rented decorative fruit to local taverns for festivals or marriages, where it would be displayed but never eaten. The same pineapple might make the rounds for years, acquiring a name, a personality, even rumors of scandal. You linger by the pineapple a moment longer. No crown, no sash, no dainty velvet throne, but still something noble. Back at the inn, you write a brief note and ask the stable boy to deliver it to the estate. The pineapple here is shy but ambitious. The melon in the bakery window seems curious but skeptical. All is well in the outer regions. I remain loyal to the conquered. Of obscure tidbit, a handful of fruit-themed political clubs emerged in late 18th century England, mostly as parodies of Parliament. The Society of Seedless Unity debated topics like Are grapes tyrants? And Do oranges deserve coats? They disbanded after a tragic pie incident. Historians still debate whether any of them were elected to real office. One, allegedly, ran for mayor under the name Clementine Piths. And as the sun dips below the roofs of the village, you tuck the last crumbs of your pastry into your mouth and wonder if this soft, fruity absurdity has made you a little more patient, a little more open to nonsense, a little more ready for whatever comes next. Weeks pass, then a month, then two. The world carries on, though you now find yourself noticing fruit in shop windows the way others notice church spires. As every apple feels mildly political, every melon seems full of potential. You receive letters from the estate, short, poetic, often embroidered with barely restrained chaos. From Judith. The pineapple is reading Stoic philosophy now. The melon has joined a prayer group for seasonal crops. Dash attempted to introduce a lychee to the conservatory. It was politely declined. From Papa has commissioned portraits of both fruits. The artist wanted to make them more expressive. I stopped him at eyebrows. From the Dash. There's a growing movement for fruit democracy. Some guests have demanded a citrus council. I suspect revolution, or at least a lemon-themed petition. Your replies are shorter, warmer. You reassure them that the outside world is steady but less charming. That no one out here seems to name their pears or write sonnets to plums. That the bakery near the river has started selling pineapple truce tarts unintentionally or not. Real historical anchor. It was not uncommon for events at major estates, especially ones involving eccentric rituals, to inspire village fads. In 1785, one noble's obsession with walnuts led to the brief popularity of nut-themed weddings, including vows recited in orchards and walnut-stamped marriage contracts. One such couple reportedly lasted until the harvest soured. Judith sends you a final note before winter. The conservatory is being insulated for the cold. We've wrapped the melon in wool. The pineapple refuses shawls. It says it's making a point. If you're ever in the mood for more nonsense and scandal, you know the way back. A obscure tidbit. In one forgotten corner of Norfolk, a fruit was buried each year in a solemn ceremony to mark the end of harvest and the start of remembering. It was called the tucking of the plum. Children attended with tiny shovels. Historians still debate if it was a ritual, a joke, or something older. You fold the letter. Add it to the others. A whole archive now, bound not by war or empire but something stranger and the politics of absurdity, the tenderness of the symbols, the beautiful weirdness of giving meaning to a fruit. Outside, the trees are turning. You sip your tea and begin to plan your return. Not because you have to, but because something in you misses that quiet glint of ceremony. And the way peace smells faintly of citrus. You return in spring. The path is the same, but the hedgerows feel friendlier, as if they too have read your letters. The estate rises beyond the mist like a memory made solid. Towers slightly crooked, gardens in bloom, the conservatory glass catching the sun like a well-polished idea. You're met at the gate by a goose. Unofficially, probably Judith's. It eyes you with the knowing suspicion of someone who's seen too many elections. Inside, the drawing room is quieter than you remember. Dash is napping in a chair, a half-finished manuscript dangling from his fingers titled Melon Monarchy, an oral history. Judith greets you with her usual disapproval. You've gotten taller or more dramatic. Appears moments later and offers a scone and a hug. The pineapple missed you. You find it still seated on its velvet pedestal, unchanged except for a tiny crown of dried lavender placed at a respectful tilt. The melon is beside it, now on a stone base engraved with a quote. "Let there be peace among fruits and plenty of jam." The conservatory smells of lemon leaves and soft pride. Here's your historical anchor, a handful of Georgian estates left behind visitor books filled with strange entries. Some praised the rhubarb pudding, others wrote odes to specific pieces of furniture. But occasionally in the margins someone would scribble a single word. "Stayed. Not visited, not passed through, stayed." You walk the garden path one more time, everything feels the same and better. The absurdity hasn't faded. If anything, it's settled into something real. An obscure tidbit. In a museum near Bath, there exists a carved walnut shell containing a tiny poem. We gathered, we wondered, we laughed. And the fruit remained. Historians don't know who wrote it, but maybe that doesn't matter. So maybe what matters is that it was written at all. The house fades behind you as the sun leans gently against the hills. The carriage rocks softly along the road, its wheels singing a lullaby in the language of loose stone and mossy bends. As outside, the sky is milk blue. The wind is slow, patient, almost apologetic. A field of quiet sheep watches you pass, their stillness blending into the rhythm of the land. And inside, you close your eyes and remember. Though the pineapples glint in the morning sun. Though the melons silent retreat into the gazebo. Judith's fierce knitting. Dash's enthusiastic treatise. His voice always full of equal parts reason and mischief. You remember the scent of tea in porcelain, the way scones crumbled just right when secrets were passed beside them. You remember the strange comfort of being among people who understood the power of fruit to hold meaning, and the even stranger comfort of being allowed to believe in it too. The world outside is returning to normal, but something in you has shifted, slowed, softened. You've walked through a place where silliness was sacred, where peace was negotiated one petal, one poem, one perfect breakfast at a time. And now, as your head leans back against the seat, and your breath deepens like evening over the orchard, you understand. Sometimes the stories that soothe us best are the ones that let fruit wear crowns. Let melons sulk in gazebos, and let people, just for a little while, make sense out of nonsense. The road hums, the breeze drifts in, and somewhere just beyond sleep, as a pineapple turns toward the morning light. They're still untouched, they're still triumphant, they're still waiting for the next story. Good night.